Good work. Okay. I hope I can be heard. If I can't, if you can't hear me, please, somebody post it. Otherwise, I'm assuming I can be heard.
We hear you. We hear
You
you.
got me. Okay, good. Thank you, Ferret. Um, okay, so we have a new subject tonight. Really, it should be goyim and halacha and all the halachas that pertain to goyim, having goyim, etc., etc. Okay, we're learning Lili Nishmas, Yehuda Shimon, Zechon Levracha ben Yeshua Yosef Moshe, and Mordechai Chana, Zechon Levracha ben Chaim Yitzchak Zev, and Aryalev, Zechon Levracha ben Yeshua Adam Zalman. I guess I'd add to that, it's my father's yahrzeit in 2 days, so Moshe Dov, Reb Moshe Dov ben Reb Shalom. And of course, with the schus for everybody with the tzaras in Eretz Yisrael and the tzaras all over, you should only hear Besuras Taivas. Okay, so there's a lot to discuss. There's really a lot to discuss with Amira La'akim. We'll start with Amira La'akim, which means what is a guy allowed to do for you on Shabbos, what a guy is not allowed to do for you on Shabbos. Just like every other area on halacha, there's quite a lot of misunderstanding about what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do. Unfortunately, for in this subject, kashrus, most people, if not all people, are way too strict. By Amir La'akim, asking God to do things on Shabbos, most people are way too lenient. So, there's going to come out a lot of chumras, and hopefully we'll just get clarity in what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do on Shabbos. And the truth is, asking a guy to do anything that's also for you to do. For example, what comes up a lot lately is a lot of people are getting pets, dogs, and they want to get them neutered or spayed, which is an isser. So how do you go about doing that? One of the eitzes is to give it to a guy to do it for you, but a guy is really not allowed to do it for you either. So depending on, it has to be done in the correct way, and then it would be allowed. But most of the time, asking God to do things for us applies on Shabbos. So the basic halacha is that we're not allowed to ask a guy to do anything for us on Shabbos. What's the reason for that? A guy does not have to keep Shabbos. If a guy was owned, like we learned in this week's parsha, right? So there, if you owned a slave, so then the slave has to keep some form of Shabbos. But if the guy is not owned, but why can't we ask a guy to do things? So basically, there's three reasons. There's three reasons why we're not allowed to ask a guy to do malachas on Shabbos. The first, in no particular order, but the first is that it's going to cheapen Shabbos, right? Meaning, if you're going to get used to asking Goyim to do things for you, so then if you can't find a guy to do for you, then you might end up doing it by yourself, which obviously is not a good thing. So the Chacham just said you can't ask anybody to do things for you on Shabbos. That's reason number one. Reason number two is that they're sort of like our agent, and we know that an agent is like us. So if we're asking a guy to do something for us, then it's as if we're doing it. However, this does not work. This does not work for other areas, meaning you cannot have a guy toivel kalim for you. You can't have a guy check vegetables for you. You can't have a guy check eggs for you. Even though maybe eggs nowadays, maybe there would be much more lenient, since that's what I've been texting out. That eggs, because eggs are not really, even the blood is really not an issue nowadays. We're just machmer anyway, so maybe a guy would be trusted. But the reason why we're not allowed to ask a guy to do these things for us, meaning mikvah and checking for bugs, is we just don't trust them. Since they don't keep halacha, So we don't trust that they're going to do it correctly. But theoretically, they could be our agent. So if a guy is doing something with us on Shabbos, like turning on lights, turning on a crock pot, etc., then that would be they're acting as our agent, so it's a problem. And the third is really an important one, and it gets confusing for people. But we're not allowed to talk about non-Shabbos activities on Shabbos, which unfortunately, as we all know, is something extremely difficult for all of us to keep, right? But we're really not allowed to talk about non-Shabbos activities on Shabbos, right? For example, you're not supposed to discuss a vacation. Somebody asked me tonight that today he discussed going away on vacation with his wife, and he wants to know if he should maybe not take the vacation since they talked about it and started planning it on Shabbos. It's not going to make it usher to do, but you're really not supposed to talk about these things. It's very nice that the person realized that and was asking such a question, but you're not allowed to talk about weekday activities on Shabbos. So just not to digress for too much, but meaning if you want to discuss with your friend or something about going on a trip, so if the trip would be mutter to go on Shabbos, then it'll be okay. Like for example, if you want to go on a walk, so you're allowed to walk on Shabbos, so you're allowed to talk about walking during the week on Shabbos. Like, oh, let's go tonight on a walk because there's no malacha. There's no malacha. You can't plan it. You can't mamish plan it because that's called preparation. But if you just want to discuss it, then you're allowed to. So basically, like if you want to go to Manhattan, so if you would say, let's walk to Manhattan, then that would be mutter to discuss. Now, obviously, nobody's going to take you up on the offer to walk to Manhattan, but it will be understood that you mean to drive to Manhattan. The only reason why you're saying walk is because it's Shabbos, then that would be okay, right? But to tell a guy to turn on a light, turning on a light is something that's also to do on Shabbos. So even if theoretically you're in a situation where you may be able to ask a guy to turn on the light, we don't like saying that you're asking the guy to turn on the light because turning on the light or turning off a light is a weekday activity which we're not allowed to discuss. So that's the third one, and that comes up a lot. That you can't talk about weekday activities. Meaning even if you have a heter to let's say to turn up the heat, right, which we'll discuss. So, but the guy has no idea how to play with the thermostat. So now you have to sit there describing the thermostat, how it works, etc., etc. That falls under the isser of talking about weekday activities on Shabbos, which unfortunately we all do. I don't want to say that, but unfortunately, it's very difficult. It's something very difficult to keep. But that doesn't mean that because we talk about weekday activities doesn't mean that we should be allowed to do it when we're talking about it to a guy. That's basically where hinting comes in. Most of the reason why we're required, not meaning we're not always required to hint to a guy, but when we're required to hint to a guy, a lot of it has to do with by just hinting, you're not talking about a weekday activity because you're not telling them what malacha to do. You're hoping that they figure out what you're talking about. So anyway, so again, those are the three reasons why we are not allowed to ask God to do malacha for us on Shabbos. One is it's gonna make Shabbos cheap in our eyes, and we may end up doing malacha on our own. Two is they're acting as our agent, which when we know in halachas that if somebody does something on your behalf, it's as if you did it. And three is because we're not allowed to talk about weekday activities. So that's the basic reasons why we're not allowed to have a guy do malach for us. Now, let's discuss probably the biggest misunderstanding in these halachas of a guy doing malach on Shabbos. And I think this misunderstanding comes from is because we know that there's a concept of hinting something to a guy. So we think that if we hint something to a guy, everything is mutter. It's very rare that hinting to a guy is allowed. It's only in very few scenarios that hinting is allowed. That's one. Now, because of that, and this is misunderstanding number two, which is probably a bigger misunderstanding than number one, is that if a guy does malacha on their own on behalf of a yid, you are not allowed to benefit from that malacha on Shabbos. I'll repeat it again because people just don't understand it. If a guy voluntarily comes in to your house and says and doesn't say, he just puts on the light. So you see your mailman walks by your house, comes to put the mail into the mailbox, and sees you sitting in the dark. So you friendly your mailman. So the mailman says, "You're sitting in the dark, Sabbath observers." Okay, and he just goes and he turns on the light. The halacha is that, I mean, it's the basic halacha is you're required to leave the room. You are not allowed to sit in that room and benefit from the light that he did. That's even if he totally did it on his own. You didn't say one word. The guy walked into the room, sees you sitting in the dark, flips on the light. According to the basic halacha, is you have to leave the room. And that's because the isser to benefit from a guy's malacha view on Shabbos is even if he does it voluntarily. Okay, so then for sure, if that's the case, then certainly you're not allowed to hint to a guy to do malacha view. Meaning, if a guy does malacha voluntarily for you, you're not allowed to benefit from it on Shabbos. Then for sure, if you hint to the guy to do malacha for you and the guy does it, you're not allowed to benefit from it on Shabbos. Now we're going to go through when you are allowed to hint to a guy. But if you had no reason and no excuse to hint to the guy, then it's usher to benefit from that malacha on Shabbos. Now, just a caveat on that, and just meaning where it would be mutter is, let's say you're sitting in the room and there is some light in the room, but it's not, you're still sitting pretty much in the dark, but there's enough light in there that you could benefit from the room. So there, if the guy turns it on and you decide that you're still going to sit there and you were able to sit there and function in the room, then you're not required to leave the room because that's an indirect benefit from the guy. Meaning if you're in a pitch black room and you're just sitting in there and talking because there's nothing else to do because the lights are all off, so you're just sitting there, you have no place else to go, and you're talking, and then he turns on the light. So if you want to sit there and continue talking, and that's not called benefiting from the light, then you could still sit there. You're not required to leave the room, but you cannot take out a book and read, because then you're benefiting from a guy's malacha that he did for you, she did for you on Shabbos, right? So, and if the room was half dark, so and you would not be able to read in there, then you're not allowed to read in there either. But if you were, let's say, eating, because you don't need that much light to eat, then you can continue eating, even though you'll see the food better and it'll be more comfortable because there's a lot of light. But that's not called enough of a benefit from the light. And that would be the same thing if the guy turns on the crock pot for you or anything like that. Then it would be also for you to benefit from the malacha that the guy does. Now, this isser of a guy doing it for you is an isser d'Rabbanan. It is not also from the Torah. I should have pointed that out before. It's only isser d'Rabbanan, and that plays an important role. Maybe we'll get to it tonight, maybe not. That plays an important role in when we do allow a guy to do malacha for us. Now, another thing is, if the guy does malacha for you on Shabbos, if the guy did an Issa D'Rabbanan, then other people can benefit from it on Shabbos. If the guy did an Issa D'Oraisa, then even other people can benefit from it on Shabbos. Meaning, using the example of you sitting in a room that's pitch dark and you can't function in that room other than sitting and talking. So if the guy turns on the light, so now in the old days, a regular incandescent bulb is an Issa D'Oraisa. So since it's an Issa D'Oraisa, even if you leave the room and then other people come in to sit in the room, even though the malacha that the guy did was not for them, it was for you, they're still not allowed to benefit from it, because what the guy did was an Issa D'Oraisa. I mean, the malacha that the guy did of turning on a light is also from the Torah. So since it was also from the Torah, not only can you not benefit from it, other people also can't benefit from it. However, nowadays, light bulbs are usually LED. LED, and it's important to know, and it makes things a lot more lenient. LED is Derabanan nowadays. It is not, pretty much according to almost all poskim, an LED light bulb is, those are the light bulbs that don't get hot. So, which is most light bulbs because they take a lot less energy. Those are the Rabbanon. So therefore, if a guy, using again our scenario, a guy comes into your house and comes into the room that you're sitting in, which is dark, and turns on the light, so you're not allowed to benefit from it, but the people that were not with you at that time are allowed to benefit from it because that's a rabbinic. The guy only did something that's also from the Rabbanon, not from the Torah. So again, others also can benefit from malacha done by a guy. But if it's an Issa Rabbanon, then the others can benefit from what the guy did. Okay? Now, this is also only if the guy did the malacha on your behalf, strictly and solely on your behalf. If the guy did the malacha for their own sake, then you are allowed to benefit from it, even on Shabbos. Right? So, meaning, if let's say you are sitting in a dark room, and there's let's go in a yeshiva or a shul. You're sitting you're in one of the side rooms, and the lights are off, and you're sitting in the side room, and then the janitor comes in, and the janitor has a job to sweep the room, but the lights are off in the room. The janitor needs the lights on in the room in order to sweep. So the janitor comes in and turns on the lights. Those lights are, the janitor turned the lights on for himself or herself. Since they were turned on for their own sake, then the yid is allowed to benefit from it. Right? Because again, the guy is doing that melacha for himself and not for the yid. Oh, the yid is getting benefit from it, that's fine. As long as it was strictly for the yid, then it's strictly for the guy, then it's perfectly fine to benefit from it. So again, if the janitor comes in the room and sees you sitting there and says, "Oh, let me turn on the lights," and turns on light, then you cannot use the light in the room. If the janitor says, "I'm turning on the light in order to sweep," then you are allowed to. Now, one of the shticks that could be done is that, let's say you need the light on in a certain room and there's a guy around. So if you legitimately give the guy a job to do something in that room, and the guy ends up having to turn on the light for his or her own sake to get the light on in the room to do the job, then that's mutter to do. So meaning, if you need a light on in a bedroom and you have a cleaning lady, and you go tell the cleaning lady to go sweep the room, and you know she's going to turn on the light, so then you can tell her, please go sweep this in this room. She goes in, she turns on the light, you let her sweep, and then you could tell her, you could stop her, and you shouldn't tell her not to turn off the light because that's Shabbos. That's talking about a Shabbos. That's talking about a weekday activity on Shabbos. You just you can signal to her and say, when she wants to go shut the light, you can signal to her and say, no, don't, no, and that would be enough, right? So one of the eitzes that's brought for somebody who wants to who needs something a light on. So basically, what you can do is you could tell a guy, let's say you can put a beer, like say you need a guy to turn on light in the room. You say, hey, would you like a free beer? And the guy says, yeah. So you say, okay, in that room over there, there's a beer in the corner. You can go get it and have it. Guy goes in there, turns on the light to find the beer, takes the beer. That would be fine. That would be okay. Because again, you're getting them to turn it on for themselves. Like, you can't go tell them, by the way, I need the light on in that room, therefore I put a beer in the room, and therefore you should go turn on the light. That's not allowed. But you just tell them that there's a beer there, and then, or anything else. We're just using an example, and then it would be okay. Now, one other thing is that if the guy does do malacha for you, it doesn't become mutter even on Motzei Shabbos until the amount of time that it would take for that malacha to be done. Meaning, so if it's a light, so that takes a second to turn on. So you can benefit right a second after Shabbos. But let's say a guy, um, delivered a package for you on Shabbos. Right? You didn't ask them to. They just went and delivered a package to you on Shabbos from someplace else, or you delivered to your friend, and it would take an hour. So then you're not allowed to benefit from that package until until an hour after Shabbos is over. Meaning whatever amount of time it would take for you for what it would take for you to do whatever malacha it was that the guy did for you, then you have to wait that amount of time on Motzei Shabbos. Okay, that's not so common. Okay. Okay, I see no questions. So either I'm being clear, being confusing, or we haven't really gotten to anything. There's one question. Okay, I haven't gotten to anything specific. Yes, you're allowed to put something specific in that room in order for them to go in there. Yes, 100%. Okay, so I'm just not sure which way I should go. Okay, so then let's stick with the lights. Let's stick with turning on off and on the lights, which is usually the most common thing. Right? Now, sometimes there's confusion. Like, somebody says, "Oh, I asked the Rav," and the Rav said, I can ask a guy turn on the lights," and then somebody says, "Well, I asked the Rav, and he said no." All right. Now there's a big difference in asking a guy to turn on lights and asking a guy to turn off lights. Okay, meaning and many people don't understand this, and it can get confusing because you ask a shayla and you say, "Okay, I need the lights on in a room because my kids really want to read," and the answer would be most of the time that's not a good enough reason to turn on the lights. But if you go and you ask the Rav that I need the lights off because my kids need to sleep, then you might get an answer from the Rav that it's okay. Now we're going to get back to this, but let's understand the basic reasons why one is allowed and one is not allowed. And that is because there's a difference between turning on a light is an issa d'oraisa, turning off a light is an issa d'rabbanan. So where it's much easier for us to ask a guy to do an issa d'rabbanan, because then it's two d'rabbanans. Like we said before, asking a guy to do work for you on Shabbos is a d'rabbanan. Asking a guy to do an issa d'rabbanan is now two d'rabbanans, right? Which again, the rabbanan are always there to put in fences and put up restrictions so that we don't come to do an issa from the Torah. So the question is, how many boundaries and how many fences do we need? All right. So again, the first one is that we're not allowed to ask a guy to do something for us is an issa d'rabbanan. To ask a guy to do an issa d'rabbanan is already twice removed from an issa d'oraisa. So therefore, it's going to automatically be more lenient. So asking God to turn on a light is asking him to do something from the issa from the Torah. Asking him to shut off a light is an issa d'rabbanan. Now, why it's an issa d'rabbanan to shut off as opposed to turning on is it's not really complicated, but it can get a little confusing. Meaning every malacha from the Torah has to have there has to be a positive outcome. Right? So, meaning when you are extinguishing, so extinguishing is one of the 39 malachas. Extinguishing in the Mishkan, the reason for extinguishing in the Mishkan was they put out, what they would do is they would take the wicks on the menorah and pre-light them so that they would light better. In the old days, this doesn't really apply nowadays to our wicks, but in the old days, the wicks needed to be singed before they would, so they would light better later. So when you would put out the wicks, you're actually putting it out in order to save the wick for later. That's doing something in order to have a positive, meaning you need to put out the wick in order to do something. I don't say positive, maybe productive, something productive out of it. But to put something out because you just want to put it out and you don't particularly care about it after it's put out, that's nothing productive. So therefore, that's only a derabanan. So therefore, when you shut a light in a room, you just don't want the light on anymore. So you're not doing anything productive with that. You're just removing the light. But turning on a light is something productive. So therefore, it's also from the Torah to turn on a light. It is not also from the Torah to turn off a light. And therefore, asking a guy to turn off a light is a whole lot more lenient than asking a guy to turn on a light. That's one reason. Yes, LED lights are derabanan, so asking a guy to turn on a light in derabanan is a derabanan. So most lights, fluorescent lights are still issur from the Torah unless they're LED fluorescent, and and um, and turning off is also derabanan. A fridge light that was not turned off before Shabbos. So that will we get to that tonight? Maybe we'll try and discuss that. We'll try and discuss that soon. All right, but anyway, so again, it's important to know which malacha you're trying to do to try and get the guy to do. If the malacha, which the majority of the time is the Rabbanon, then you're allowed to. It's more makel, not always allowed, but it's more makel to ask a guy to do a Rabbanon. To ask a guy to do a deraisa is very difficult to get a heter for that, unless very necessary. Which we'll go through the reasons why you'd be allowed to soon. But again, sticking with this concept. So, what about a guy turning on a flame for you on Shabbos because you need to cook? So that would be a problem because that's an issa deraisa. What that has to do with Bishul Akum, that Be'ez Hashem will discuss in a different week. But if you wanted a guy to turn on the flame for you, so that's this from the Torah. But what happens if you want to ask a guy to turn off the flame? So then that would be an Issa D'Rabbanan, because you're not trying to save a wick with your flame. We have gas stoves or electric stoves, and you're just asking the guy to turn it off because you want it off. So then depending on why you'd want it off, it would be mutter now. But the point is that turning on a flame is an Issa D'Oraisa, turning off a flame is an Issa D'Rabbanan. Okay, so that's another important point to understand. Now, since we discussed the hinting, so let's go back to that. So again, really, you're not allowed to benefit from a guy's doing malach for you on Shabbos at all, even if they volunteered. So then, like we said, for sure, hinting to them, you're not allowed to do. Okay, so then where does this hinting come from? So the hinting comes from is when you're gonna have indirect benefit from what the guy is going to do, then you're allowed to hint. Right? Meaning, if let's say there is light in your room. No, let's go with a more basic case. Shutting the lights off in a room. Shutting lights in a room is an indirect benefit. You're not benefiting from what the guy did for you. If the guy turns on the lights for you, that's clearly a direct benefit. If the guy turns off the lights, then that's an indirect benefit because you could use the room. You'd like the lights off so you could sleep. But the bottom line is there's no direct benefit. The room is not any more or less usable because the guy did not change the room, didn't change anything in the room. So by shutting it off, that's an indirect benefit. So therefore, if somebody would need the lights off in a room, you'd be able to hint to the guy that the lights are on in the room, and then that would be okay. Now, how do you hint? So hinting with your hands or your head is not allowed, meaning you can't just take your finger and point it to the lights and say, like this, or some sort of code that the guy would understand to shut it off. That's not allowed, right? But basically what you can do is you can say, there's a lot of light in this room. And then that's just a statement that there's light in the room. Then you hope that the guy understands that you mean to shut the light. Obviously, if you have a guy that's used to this, that's around Yiddish houses, so then the guy will understand from that. But if the guy doesn't understand, and this does come up, you call the guy from the street and you hint to them and you say that there's a lot of light in this room. So then the guy says to you, so should I shut it off? Cannot answer yes, because that's telling the guy. Right? So you'd have to somehow say, yeah, you just have to repeating yourself until the guy realizes what they're doing. That's why when you have these communities that have a Shabbos guy, so that Shabbos guy is trained in, you hope, or after the first few weeks, the Shabbos guy is trained in and know exactly what you want. So, but it's important to know, and especially communities. Somebody asked me a few months ago about getting a Shabbos guy in this community. They have them around Lakewood. I think there's even you can pay a subscription price to have the guy drive by your house at certain times. There's a price for a subscription that you can pay, and they'll drive by every Friday at a certain time, and then you could tell them, you put like a flag out or something, and they will they'll stop by you, and you can hint to them, right? So then, but that would be okay, but they have to be trained in to know what the hinting is. Right? So basically, you just have to say it's too much light in here, or I can't sleep, or something like that, and then that hinting is enough. Right? But happens to be parenthetically, it happens to be that many times you're even allowed to ask the guy straight out to shut the lights in the room. For example, a children's room where they're not going to be able to sleep, or if somebody has a very difficult time sleeping, and the lights are on in the room, so then that's considered. It could very well be that the person is considered a chayla, or all children's needs are considered a chayla. So if they're considered a chayla, if they're considered not well, we haven't gotten to the guidelines of when you're allowed to ask a guy, but since we're discussing it, we'll just put it out there that if somebody is a chayla, then you are allowed to ask a guy straight out to do malacha, and it could even be malacha deraisa. We'll discuss that, but certainly a malacha derabanan you could ask a guy to do. So if it's a child that needs the lights off in the room, so you could even be able to ask a guy straight out, because that's considered a tzarech enough for the chayla. Certainly hinted. Hinting is going to be okay. All right. So that's the first one. So indirect benefit, you're allowed to hint to a guy. So again, in shutting off a light is indirect benefit. This shaila comes up a lot in a hospital room where the TV is on. So can you go ask the guy to shut the TV? So to ask straight out, no, but to hint would be okay, because it's an indirect benefit to have them shut the TV, because the room is perfectly usable even with the TV on. You're just asking them to shut it makes it, that's indirect, so that would be okay. Another thing is for a large loss, then you would be allowed to hint. You still can't ask the guy straight out. So for example, the Gemara's examples is a fire. So if there's a fire in the house, you can go out and tell a guy. Just obviously talking about where there's no eruv or to move muksa. So you can call out to goyim and you could say, if whoever puts out the fire won't lose. Which basically what you're doing is you're telling the goyim that you're going to take care of them after Shabbos, and if they come help you. So if they do that, if you do it like that, then that would be okay. So again, in the case of a heavy loss, that would be fine. What would the heavy loss be? So let's say you left on a few flames before Shabbos or something like that. So I don't know how much gas costs in the house, but if it's somebody that's having a hard time making ends meet, and to have a bunch of flames on, then it may, and it's causing them a loss, then you'd be able to hint to a guy to do that. That goes without saying that if there's open flames and you're afraid from children, etc., then of course you could probably even ask the guy straight out. Right? Another example would be if there's something that's a machlokes, whether it's allowed to be done on Shabbos, then the guy could be hinted. Right? Meaning if it's a big machlokes, whether you're allowed to do, let's use an example. I think we learned Byrer a couple of years ago. So when Byrer, we know there's a big machlokes amongst the Paiskim, the contemporary Paiskim, if you're allowed to use a peeler on Shabbos, or is that Byrer? Can you peel cucumbers, apples, whatever it is with a peeler? So even if you don't use a peeler, you would be able to hint to a guy to peel for you, and that's perfectly mutter. Or let's say you don't open soda bottles or soda cans. These are all big machlokes, and there's many that are lenient. So you'd be able to say, you'd be able to tell the guy if you're strict and you don't open cans or bottles, you'd be able to just like put the can down, and they'll understand to open it, and that would be then it would be okay. Um, right. So now another important point of hinting is that you're not allowed to hint when it has a command in it. Meaning you can't say to them, do me a favor, there's not enough light in here, which is not, because you would think that that's a hint, right? You're just telling them, if you say there's not enough light in here, then that's okay, because you're not telling them to turn on the light. You're hinting, right? But to say, do me a favor, there's not enough light in here, then you're sort of hinting together with a command, and that is not allowed, right? So now, going back to if what an indirect benefit, because based on what we were saying till now, when would there ever be a situation where you could hint to a guy to turn on a light in the room? We said even if the guy does it voluntarily, you're not allowed to, right? So the answer would be is using one of the examples we said earlier, which is that let's say you have multiple lights in a room. Let's say you have a large living room, dining room, and the lights are on in the living room, which is giving plenty of light into the dining room, but it would be a lot better for you if you can have the dining room lights on and you're having guests and it's embarrassing that your dining room lights are off. So there, if as long as, again, using the example, the lights are on in the living room, but you can eat in the dining room. There's light coming from the living room, but it's not a lot. It's not a large amount of light, and therefore you'd like to have um you're allowed to have you want to have more light. So in that case, since it's an indirect benefit, you're allowed to hint, right? So again, if you can use the dining room based on the light coming from the living room, then you're allowed to hint to a guy and you say, it's a little dark on that side of the dining room, and you hope that they realize what you mean to tell them to do is to turn on the light. Again, since your dining room is usable with the light coming from the living room, that's allowed. But if it's really dark in the dining room and you're really seriously considering not eating in there because it's so dark, then you would not be allowed to hint to the guy to do this. So therefore, that would be a case where turning on the lights would be okay. And another one is air conditioning. Yes, that somebody asked. Yes, this applies to all malachas, not just lights. I think lights is the most common example. If anybody has any other examples, please post it or ask. So yes, the same thing with air conditioning. If let's say air conditioning is a little bit confusing. Heat, again, we'll discuss this in future weeks, but heat, there's something called everybody's kakol chole etzel. So heat is everybody's considered sick when it comes to cold. So if it's very cold in your house, then you're allowed to ask a guy to turn on the heat, and you're allowed to ask straight out because everybody's considered sick. The question is, how cold does cold have to be, right? So let's say it's 65 degrees. In all probability, most people can function pretty well in 65 degrees. It might not be comfortable, but you're not going to be considered sick. If the heat's totally off and it's 60 degrees, 55 degrees, whatever it is, then that I think is not functioning, and for sure you could ask. But 65, it might be functioning. Like when people ask me, well, what temperature, or like, is this considered too cold? I tell them, well, how much money would you take if I offered you to sit in this room for an hour or two at 65 degrees? So if you tell me you wouldn't take any money in the world because it's too cold, then obviously for you, it's uncomfortable and you could ask the guy. But if you'd say, okay, I'll even do it for $50, then clearly for you, it's not so uncomfortable. So meaning you have to be intellectually honest with yourself as to, is it really uncomfortable with the heat? However, if it's 65 degrees and it's comfortable enough to live in there and you would stay there, then you'd be able to hint the guy to turn it up, because that's an indirect benefit. I hope I'm being clear with this. Meaning if you will use the room the way it is, you just want the guy to make it more comfortable, then it would be okay. So then you'd be able to hint. Meaning you're sitting in the room at 65 degrees, you'd like it to be 70 degrees. So then that you could hint, because it's indirect benefit, because you're gonna sit in the room either way. Right? Now, if it's really cold, then you're allowed to ask the guy straight out anyways. The question is let's say you have a kitchen where if the heat is, there's ovens on, and in the kitchen it's warm, and in the dining room it's really cold, but you can just go eat your Shabbos meal in the kitchen as opposed to the dining room. So then that's probably the right thing to do, unless you have guests. Meaning the point is, with all these things, and there's something to keep in mind, the variables are so it's so different. All the scenarios, you cannot compare one scenario to the next, because the smallest nuance can make the biggest difference in this. So I mean, we're going to try and give us a set amount of rules, but this is why you really need to know, or to ask a shaila, and certainly not to compare one psak from another psak. There's no way you can ever compare one case to another case, because they're so different. The same thing with air conditioning. So somebody's writing here about a pregnant woman in the summer, can the air conditioning be turned on for her? So it really depends on how hot it is. If you'd sit in the room anyways, you just want it to be more comfortable, then you'd be able to hint. If it's really hot, and it has to be really hot, and you're not functioning as a normal person, then you'd be able to ask straight out for the air conditioning to be on. Most of the time, I think it's usually, unless it's extremely hot, the room is usually usable, in which case you can hint to a guy how to turn on the air conditioning. Only problem is sometimes some thermostats are quite complicated and how to do it, in which case you have a problem, because you can't say, okay, press this button, press that button, press this button, because that is A, it's not hinting, and B, you're talking about Shabbos activities. So you'd have to know exactly how to maneuver that. Yeah, so let's say you have an older person, and you really need the light on. So then again, if there's any sort of a sakana, then of course you can go ask the guy. Now, usually an older person, depending on how old, depending on the scenario, can be considered somebody who's sick. So somebody who's sick, we're much more lenient on with asking a guy, which I will get to Bez Hashem next week. Okay, so yeah, so what about if you got to shut the fridge or freezer light? So that's a common question. So, but 1 second, there's a question about the heating. Let me see. Sounds the heat turning on you always because it's too cold and it's dangerous. If it's warm and you're okay, then it's indirect. Yes, but if it's cold and it's dangerous, the difference is if it's cold, it doesn't have to be dangerous. It's just you're considered a chayla when it comes to cold. So therefore, you'd be able to ask the guy straight out. You can go to the street and say to the guy, it's cold in my house. I am a Sabbath observer. I cannot turn on the heat. Can you please turn on the heat for me? That would be perfectly mutter to do. If it's functioning, then it's indirect, but then you can only hint, right? Meaning if it's cold and legitimately cold and you can't use it, then you can't use the house and you have no other option, then you're allowed to ask to go straight out. If it is cold, if it's usable and you still want the heat on, then you'd have to hint, right? And that's basically, again, the main rule is hinting is allowed when it's an indirect benefit. If it's a direct benefit, then it's not allowed unless it meets the other qualifications, which Be'ez Hashem will do next week. I hope that's clear. Okay, tzarchei tzibur. Yeah, a lot of misunderstanding about tzarchei tzibur. Most opinions are that there is no difference between a tzibur and not a tzibur, and you're not allowed to ask a guy to do things for the tzibur. Meaning, the shul is on 70, the temperature in the shul, most shuls I think like to have their temperature at 68 degrees, 70 degrees, and for some reason the air conditioner is not only one air conditioner is working and not the other, and it's 74 degrees, 75 degrees. I would say the majority of poskim would say that you cannot ask the guy to do that, even if it's tzarchei tzibur. There is no, according to most poskim, I'm not saying there aren't leniencies, according to most poskim, tzibur, and a tzibur, by the way, is considered three people. According to Allah, a tzibur is three people. So there's no heter for a tzibur any more than non-tzibur. Now, hinting would be okay. Like we said, if the shul is at 75 degrees, so it's uncomfortable, but everybody would stay in shul anyway, so then you're allowed to hint because that's an indirect benefit. If the shul would be non-functioning, then it would be a shaila whether you're allowed to ask the guy to turn it on. Tzarchei tzibur, though, is really, according to most poskim, not any different than anything else. Now, it could be that if there's no place else to daven, and it's going to ruin people's Shabbos, and then they can be considered like a chayla because we didn't get to daven, etc., etc. These are all the variables that have to be asked. Let's say there's a bar mitzvah, let's say there's an afra, so and it would be a big tsar. These are all the variables that have to be taken into account here. And I wish I can give exact guidelines, but each case needs to be managed on itself. I'll just give one example before we log off. I'll hopefully I'll remember to give one more example. But getting back to the fridge freezer, so you're allowed to ask a guy to open the refrigerator door. That's certainly not a problem, right? Because the reason okay, I don't know if we should get it. Okay, we'll go. Once we're discussing, we'll discuss it. Basically, there's something called the psik ratio, which I think we've discussed, which is indirect. I shouldn't use that because that's going to confuse it with what we were saying before. But basically, when you do one malacha and there's another malacha, if you do something and do an action, and a malacha will result of the action, but it's not direct, that's called the psik ratio. Meaning, if you come into a room and you turn on a light, you turning on the light, you flip a switch, you turn on the light, that's what's supposed to happen. When you open a refrigerator door or a freezer door, what you're doing is opening a door. Happens to be a light will turn on. That's called psik ratio. That means that something automatically is going to happen. Or if you forgot something in your car, if you forgot the food in the car, you need the guy to go get it from the car, right? So that would be another example. So what's wrong with opening a car door? A car is not muksa. I mean, it's muksa, but it's no different than muksa of a house. And you're allowed to you're allowed to open the door of your house. You're allowed to open the door of your car. The only problem is the light turns on. But that's not intended. But we say, since it's automatic, you're not allowed to do it. But a guy does not have to do that, keep that restriction. Meaning a guy doesn't have to worry about psik ratio, right? So therefore, if you forget something in your car and you tell the guy to open the door, so the guy could open the door. If the light turns on, we don't care, that's no problem. Same thing with a refrigerator. It's since the guy does not have to keep Hilchos Shabbos to, the chumras that we keep. So since it's a psik ratio, the guy is allowed to go into the refrigerator for you. L'chatchila, no problem. Obviously, you should remember to shut your refrigerator light before Shabbos. And if you didn't, then you're allowed to ask the guy to open your refrigerator door. That's perfectly mutter. And then once it's open, so then we said that to shut off a light But to unscrew a light bulb is a derabanan because it's going off, and it's a big need because you need your refrigerator for Shabbos. And then once it's open, then you could tell the guy straight out to unscrew the light bulb because that's a tzarech for Shabbos to have a refrigerator. I hope that's clear. Bez Hashem, next we will discuss that. We'll discuss that again. Yeah, I said I was going to discuss something already, and I don't remember what it was. Okay. So somebody's posting something happened. Light was not on the first floor bathroom. Handicapped guest coming. It was very dark. Right. So, okay, I'll just read the whole question. Light was not on the first floor bathroom. Was having a handicapped guest. No window in the bathroom, so it was really dark. I was told to get a guy to turn on light. My usual neighborhood was not on, so I stopped the woman jogging in front of my house. Do I have to ask her if she is Jewish before hinting to her? No, you do not have to ask her if she's Jewish because the majority of people in the streets are not. I mean, if you were in Monroe or if you were in Yerushalayim, then yes, but in around, it really depends on your neighborhood. But the assumption is that somebody jogging on the street is not Jewish, so you do not have to ask. You also don't even, in that case, since it's for somebody handicapped, I would say you don't have to hint either. You can ask straight out because again, a chayla, tzara for a chayla is mutter. If it's mutter to do it on Shabbos, then that's called a need for Shabbos, and therefore you would not have to hint. It can't hurt to hint, but you can ask straight out. Yeah, so with the electric key to open the car door does make it a little bit more complicated. So because they have to actually press an electronic thing in order to get the car door open. So it would really depend on why you need the item from the car door, and how important it is for you, et cetera, et cetera. If there's guests, that also plays into it, and those type of things. Okay, let's say you're hosting a minyan in a hot place and the AC is running in the house and the guy can only come on Shabbos and the guy knows before they come, they're here to fix the AC. Is that tzarich tzibur so everyone can daven properly? It really, if they would not daven there anyways, meaning if it's so hot that they would have to leave and they wouldn't daven, then yes, then it would be okay. If they would still daven there or you can daven outside and it won't be so hot, then it would be more of a problem. It would be up to the individual situation to figure it out, but in most cases, we probably say that that he can come. It also helps that he was asked before Shabbos and he's coming on Shabbos, and a lot of it could be that coming on Shabbos is for himself. Okay, you want me to repeat about the psik resha? So psik resha means psik resha means to cut off a head. That's literally what it means. But it's just two words of a sentence, which is called in the halachic terminology, we call it psik resha. But basically, it's a strange thing. But back then, kids would play with chicken heads from dead chickens. They would play with the heads. I think they have a Purim stick, right? They have these. It looks like they have these chicken heads. They sell them in the stick stores. I think that's where that comes from. That was a toy for children. So the question is, if you're killing a chicken on Shabbos because you want the chicken's head, would that be mutter? Because you don't want the chicken to die. You prefer the chicken to stay alive. The only reason why you're killing the chicken is because you need the head. So really, you're not doing the malacha that you're doing is unintentional. You're cutting off the head, but you don't want the chicken to die. It happens to be that psik resha v'lo yamos. Can you cut off a chicken's head and it won't die? So it's not meaning the person's going to say, well, I'm not doing a malacha because I'm just taking off the chicken's head because I want it for a toy for my child. To which the answer says, well, it's an automatic that you're going to be killing a chicken on Shabbos, so therefore you can't do it because it's a psik resha below yamos. So you're going to cut off its head, it's not going to die. So that's basically like the code word for something that's going to automatically happen, even if that's not your intention. For example, opening a refrigerator door. The guy could say, I'm not doing malacha. I'm just opening a refrigerator door. The answer will say back to him, well, you're opening a refrigerator door and the light's automatically turning on. So that's psik resha v'lo yamos. You're going to cut off the chicken's head, it's not going to die. You know that the light's going to turn on. So even though your intention is to open the door, but you know that there's going to automatically a malacha be done for you, so therefore you're not allowed to do it. That's only for a yid. A guy doesn't have to keep this, because the bottom line is all you're asking the guy to do is open a refrigerator door. Happens to be a light will turn on, we don't have to be makbid on that for a guy. A guy doesn't have to keep that. A yid has to keep that. A guy does not have to keep that. So anything that's a psik resha would be okay. Right, so that's the problem with the Shabbos mode in the refrigerator. The only way to get the light off is to press buttons. So, so that's the question. So, can you really tell the guy how to press buttons? Yeah, I mean, it's not so simple, but you should try and do it in a way that's talking the least amount of malacha on Shabbos. You sort of say, like, don't say press buttons, like do that, like make with your fingers and do that. Try and avoid the discussion as much as you can. But other than that, if you can't do it, then it would be okay, because it's important for. So you're saying it was medication to go into a car. So it was a medication to go into a car for somebody considered for a chayla, and you would then 100% it would be a derabanan. Anything with electricity we paskin is a derabanan, and you need to go get the medication. So then, no, you can ask straight out. You would be able to ask straight out. Again, so we'll discuss this Be'ez Hashem next week. Somebody who's a chayla is allowed to go get medication. Let's say somebody needs Advil on Shabbos. They really don't feel you have no Advil. According to halacha, you can call a guy and ask him to drive to the pharmacy, get you medication, and bring it to you, no problem, because it's considered for a chayla. Yeah, so then we're telling the guy with the refrigerator door, meaning it would be best, once the guy opens the refrigerator door, to get the light off is an indirect benefit. So therefore, it's best if you hint to the guy how to shut off the light. If you can't, then you need your refrigerator for Shabbos, so then you'd be able to say straight out to the guy to shut off the light. You mean you don't have to stress it out. If you can get it done by hinting, good. If not, it's considered a derabanan, because, like we said, shutting off the light is a derabanan, and asking the guy is the derabanan. So that's a double derabanan, and you need a refrigerator for Shabbos. That's considered a normal function, and therefore you're okay. The way you get the guy to open the refrigerator, you just tell him open the refrigerator. Because, like we said, a psik resha, a guy does not have to worry about. So if again, the guy is just, all you're asking the guy to do is open the door on Shabbos, which is mutter. Happens to be a light that's going to go on. That's not, a guy does not have to worry about that. Yes, if you printed directions for Sabbath mode and you told him to read it, that would be certainly better than saying how to do it. But I would hope if you remember to print it already on Friday, then that I would hope that you'd remember to shut the light yourself. But if you want to just print it out, just you have it in the times that you forget, because it gets very hectic on a Friday, then that would be a good idea. So again, an indirect benefit versus direct benefit is if you can't use the room or the refrigerator or whatever it is that you're asking the guy to do, unless the guy does the malacha for you, that's a direct benefit. If you can use whatever it is that let's say the room, you could use it anyways, and you just want to enhance it, then that's an indirect benefit. That's basically what we said. Again, using our example was if you have some light coming into a room and you can use the room, but it would be much better if the light is on, that's indirect benefit. If the lights are off in the room and the only way to use it is with the guy turning on the lights, then it would be a direct benefit. I'll just leave you with one example. You also have to know what type of rav you're asking your shaila to. So a lot of times you can ask a Litvish rav something, and the Litvish have a little bit of a different attitude towards some things than others. Meaning, if you went to a rav of a shul when the shul does not normally have a kiddush, right? And then you say, oh, they're having a small kiddush and they forgot the herring and there's no eruv. Can we have a guy bring the herring? So since that shul, it's not normal for them. They don't normally have a kiddush, or they normally have a kiddush, but they don't have herring. So the Rav will say, okay, we don't have a kiddush anyways every week, or we don't usually have herring, so it's not important enough to ask the guy to bring the herring. However, if you have a shul that every single Shabbos they have herring, and it's part of the Einik Shabbos, so then a Rav might tell you, oh, I think that's important enough to warrant asking a guy to carry it on Shabbos. I know, I hope I'm not, I'm it's just trying to bring out the point that you have to know what society you're asking, where you're coming from. It's based on what people expect out of their Shabbos, and that can so therefore, meaning if somebody asked the Rav and they say, yeah, my Rav said that we can have the guy bring the herring because it's such a big tzar of Shabbos. That could be for his kahila, it is, but for somebody else's kahila where herring is just an added benefit, but everybody will be fine with sponge cake and kichel, and they don't need the herring. So then he didn't feel it was enough of a reason to allow it. So that's just a minor nourish example of knowing who the tzibur is that you're dealing with. Usually, I would think that bringing alcohol, unfortunately, for the kiddush, schnapps, or this and that, oh, the Shabbos is going to be ruined. They don't get to have a l'chaim, etc., etc. Again, it would really depend on the severity of the situation and depending on the tzibur that's being asked. If you circle the two spaces to have it pressed, then that would make it easier. Yes, I don't think you're required to do that. No, but direct benefit, you are not allowed to say straight out. You're not allowed, even if the guy, like we said in the beginning of the shir, direct benefit, not only are you not allowed to say straight out, you're not even allowed to hint, and you're not even allowed to benefit from the room if the guy does it for you. It's only indirect benefit that you could hint. Okay, it's late already. So let's just review a little bit what we've discussed. There's an Issa D'Rabbanan to ask a guy to do malacha for you. And we don't have to go through the reasons, but there's numerous reasons why you're not allowed to do it. And we basically said the two misunderstandings that many people have is that even if the guy voluntarily does malacha for you on Shabbos, you are not allowed to benefit from it. If it's Issa D'Oraisa, nobody's allowed to benefit from it until after Shabbos, and the only benefit can happen after Shabbos would take the amount of time it would take the guy to do it for you. And if it's an Issa D'Rabbanan that the guy did for you, then you're not allowed to benefit from it. Everybody else, meaning the people he did the malacha for, cannot benefit from it. Everybody else can benefit from it. Right? Hinting almost never works unless the benefit is indirect. So we said like shutting off a light is an indirect benefit because the room is usable even with the lights are on. If there's already light in the room and you want added light, then it would also be okay as long as the room is functional. Same thing with turning on heat. Same thing with turning on air conditioning. As long as the room is usable, then you'd be able to hint. And there are many times, we said there are many times that malacha is allowed to be asked from the guy, and if you are allowed to ask the malacha straight out from the guy, then you don't even have to hint. Okay, so that's basically it. The shir usually gets posted on the website tystein.com. Usually tonight, if not then tomorrow morning. Okay, we will stop there, and tomorrow, Bez Hashem, next week we'll continue. Let's just say Perek Tehillim, Perek Pei Gimel, which again discusses the when the Goyim gang up on Klal Yisrael and what we ask Hashem to do to them. Okay, Pei Gimel, Shim is Malo Asaf, Elim Adam Ilach, Atecharash, Atishkoit El, Kine Yoyevecha Yemayan, Umesanecha Nasurash, Alamcha Yirimu Sod, Yisrael Al Tzvanecha, Amru, Lechuban Achidim Igai, B'lei Yisach Hashem Yisrael Oid, Kino Tzilei Yachtav, Alecha Bris Yichroisu, Alei Adam Yishmaelim, Oyav Agrim. Vav Aman v'Amalek Peleshes Miyosh Tzor Gam Asher Nil Imam HaYisrael V'nei Leitzela Haselem Kemidyon Kisisra Kiyavan Menachal Kishan Yishmedu Ve'ein Dar HaYidam El Adama Shisemen Yidivema Ka'ir V'Chazei V'Chazav V'Chazamun V'Kam L'Tzichema Asher Amru Nishulanu Es Nois Elihim Elihai Shisema Kagagal Kikash Lifnei Ruach Keish Tevar Yor Echolava Telahi Tarim Kain Tidifim Bisarecho Sifos Chesivalim Alefneim Kalim Yivakshu Shimcha Adonai Yevoshu Bibol Adeir V'Yachru V'Yavedu V'Yedu Ki Ata Shimcha Adonai Levadecha El Yon Al Kol Haaretz Achenu Kobeis Yisrael Hanasunu Batzara V'Shuvi Ahim Devem V'Yom V'Yom V'Yabasha Hamakim Yirachim Aleyhem Yetzem Yitzol L'Rocha U'Meyafelu Loira Meshivir Degula Hashto Ba'agalav Zman Kariv V'Namar Amen. Thank you for listening. A good tvach. We should only hear Suras Tavos.